thank you for accepting to do this interview. I'm very excited to have you here, especially because that my audience are going to get more worldwide view on the topic. But let's just start by asking you to tell me about yourself. Where did you start and how your journey in this world of data science evolved from the beginning to where you're now? And it would be nice if you tell us where you're now and what you're doing.
Hello, Sabino. So I'm very, very nice to meet here. I'm really happy to share my experience. So, I mean, I'm from Spain. I'm from the north of Spain, from Asturias. And I have a background on telecommunications engineering, but also mining engineering. In fact, then I changed a little bit. It's almost like 18 years ago, I did a master in cognitive science, where I studied artificial intelligence and creativity. That was like one of the early models of like making robots write poetry. It's something that now with deep learning and GANs, it seems something normal, but 18 years ago was a little bit more complicated. So from there, I changed gears again. I made a PhD on like mathematical methods for analyzing embryogenesis, how cells, organisms grow essentially. So like how from one cell you have 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 cells. Some like migrate to make like the tail, the others to make the head, and really like how life grows. I mean, that gave me also like skills to understand how biologists and developmental biologists in particular think. And then I was teaching or being like researcher in a university, and mainly on medical data. But also I wanted to have like a bigger impact in the world, and maybe a faster impact than just like pure research. And now, 10 years ago, I applied to a position in the UN, the United Nations. Actually, I remember in the interview, I was explaining, look, what you can do with the cells, you can track in images how cells migrate, how cells move and make organs. You might be able to do that by looking to satellite images and how populations move. Okay, and sometimes that happens in reality. Actually, that's some of the projects I'm working now in the context of humanitarian crisis. So, yeah, it's 10 years ago that I joined the United Nations in New York, in the executive office of the Secretary General, and became somehow the first data scientist working in an international organization. That year, back 2010-11, was when the term data science was coined, and from there over the last decade, I've been working in what can be called AI for good. So essentially, using data science, data innovation, AI, machine learning, all these digital technologies in projects that have to do with people, with the planet, with prosperity, with peace.
That's cool. And now you're the chief data scientist at a UN Global Pulse, I guess, yeah? Could you tell us about that? I mean, why UN felt the need for having such a thing?
So actually, back in the time, what happened is that after the financial crisis, 2008, many countries lose in months in terms of development what took years to get. So somehow, like what we are living again now with the pandemic, that like economy, the social welfare, like really how we live, like change, and many people around the world like lose access to services, to health, to income, to many things. And during the financial crisis, there was like the G20, like number of countries request the United Nations, request the Secretary General to have a team that could like deal with real-time data. The same that private sector is taking decisions based on data, was taking decisions based on their data. It cannot be possible that countries that public sector was not using like the best techniques, the best data sources to really protect the vulnerable. Okay, and that was the beginning. From there, it has been a journey, and that's how the journey of also like data science, big data, AI has been evolving. But the idea is that you can the same techniques that, for instance, you use to sell your product, to do marketing online, you could use it to understand perceptions around vaccines. okay, and really and try to get people to like trust vaccines, or like the same techniques that you were telling that you use to analyze biomedical data of cells, you could use it to understand or to map where are the settlements of internal displaced populations during a crisis, and having that information, analyze it with from images from satellites, can help you give like support, like humanitarian action, and so really the a little bit of, I mean, what happened in this space is that as data science techniques have evolved, also the applications that impact really many of like important things, which is not just like making clicking ads or like selling your product. So uh, you can see, I mean, we have seen examples around like measuring poverty, like food security, human rights, hate speech, obviously like health emergencies. Really, I mean, there are many open challenges and there are many projects and tools that can help in this situation.
Is there
Also,
any special use case that you could share? Something that you have done and
I mean, for me, yeah, let's say that for me, I mean, there are many. I mean, are like really. I mean, I couldn't like single just one, but I guess that maybe like a couple of nice examples, and also like we learn from them. I mean, first is like the ones we are doing now in COVID pandemic. So, for example, I mean, we just a few days ago we just published the after print on based on the work we have been doing over the last year, like using AI-based models for epidemiological modeling in settlements and refugee camps. So essentially, we have been working together with the health team in the biggest refugee camp in the world, is in the Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, with the Rohingya population, 700,000 people, and we have created somehow a tool which is a simulator where essentially you simulate public health interventions. So what happens if like people wear masks? If they don't wear masks, if half the people wear masks. What happens if you open the schools? If you close the schools? If you open the schools one day after two? What happens if you follow certain paths? In regarding like use of health services. So I mean that work, for instance, it really has been done together with the teams on the ground from WHO, from the United Nations for Refugees, working with academics from Durham University, from London, from MIT. So really, it's a project. I mean, we are very proud. I think it's really interesting and hopefully useful, which is like using the best of the science, the best of the AI side in a context that sometimes do not have those possibilities. So I think that's like one example. Another example, another project topic we have been working a lot is around infodemics during this pandemic, and trying to set up systems to monitor the number of infodemics and health misinformation which is traveling in public information, both in social networks, but also in public media like the radio. So essentially, we look for like the public radio stations doing the speech-to-text transcription and finding messages, for instance, around vaccines, around COVID, and with that informing public health officials on what sort of information are traveling and how to counter them. So this is like a couple of examples of ways we are working right now. But I mean, again, over the years, I mean, we have some other interesting things that I was telling is like supporting both conflict, human-made conflict like wars, but also like climate disasters. I mean, the reaction or like the response after those crises, and how with remote sensing you can like get information fast. And an interesting thing is that typically AI methodologies which are like being used in other fields. They have a percentage of errors. Let's say that you can have like sensitivity, specificity, I don't know, 90%, 95%. And that works fine. But in a humanitarian scenario, you cannot allow to have sometimes one pixel wrong, because might mean like 100 more people or less, or might mean an area which is flooded or not. So essentially, we have been creating like human on the loop AI systems where the AI system is helping the human go faster. In this case, for instance, like count the number of shelters that you may have in a camp, but doing it right, okay? Because in this case, we cannot afford to have less than 99% of accuracy. So I think that this is a trend of something that, I mean, for us at least, make me think a lot is designing systems which are amplification of humans, with humans on the loop, or where the humans drive, and AI is an augmentation of what you do. Because in particular scenarios, I mean, that might be critical.
Yeah, the examples you said are very interesting, and in a sense, they are very effective. They have direct connect with human beings' lives. So one question that I had when you were talking was that all these things are built upon the data. So they are kind of reflecting the information you're getting from the data. And we know that in many situations, the data that we are dealt with are a bit biased. I give you the example of gender-based data. Sometimes women are excluded from the data, but not really seen. That exclusion is not that obvious. And since you're working towards, in a sense, making the world a better place, how do you deal with these data biases that exist? How do you handle them? Do you do them algorithmically, or you use human to kind of debias the data that you have?
I mean, the first thing is that any of these projects, essentially, we have came up with a rule that 50% of the project is the design phase, where you do iterations to understand the real problem. So it takes like 50%, like put the right question out there and understand what is the real problem. And really, even what is the data you're going to use, or what are the characteristics of the data. And it's just, I mean, then the other 50% is like the technical execution or the adaptation, but really, you need to be able to translate between disciplines to understand what is important and what is not. Okay, and this is like the first thing, because it goes beyond the bias. I mean, sometimes the bias is because the metric that you have chosen is not the right one. And sometimes there is not even right metric. So you are like working with proxies, and you need to really understand the domain. Having said that, something that we do for every project is what we call a risk and harms assessment. So really, we systematically go through all the data, through all the methodologies, and we try to understand beforehand and during the project what can go wrong, where are bias, okay? Because see that the bias is one particular thing, and but there are other things that can go wrong, and there can be like misuse, there are potentially data security issues. So I mean, we assess always all these things, and there is one part where we assess the data bias. Here, I think maybe one like comment on one of the previous points when I said that we are like trying to use like mining or like monitoring like public radio stations is because one of the typical bias that we are finding even in our research space is that most of the researchers are using like textual data sources coming from social networks, which are open, which I mean, typically Twitter or Reddit or something like that, which are biased to a particular demographic. And in many countries, even the social network which is used most is the radio. Okay, so this is maybe in the spirit of like leave no voice behind, but that was an effort to create a data set where it didn't exist before, essentially. Okay, and with that idea. So that's one. I mean, but then obviously we try to do a assessment of the bias, and then for instance, gender data is one of the things that we try to have. I mean, disaggregating in the projects where we have, I mean, where that is can be relevant. And even, I mean, lately we have been thinking, for instance, in the context of the pandemic, and that's in fact a paper that's going to be out in the coming weeks, is how from AI bias or algorithmic bias we are having, I mean, that is having an impact on increasing inequality during COVID. Okay, yeah. And that algorithmic bias can be seen in many places. I mean, everywhere from like algorithms for distribution of vaccines to, I mean, I'm now remembering this research that showed that when analyzing like it was like X-rays or CT scans to find patterns of particular diseases, because the data set that was used was mainly for men for a particular race, yeah, then didn't work for others. So I think during the pandemic, anything health related, you need to take really, it's very important to pay attention on the bias that we can have around ethnicity, around gender, around context, and this being part of the challenge, how to transpose solutions from one place to a different one. Okay, that is, but then we're seeing those sort of things at many layers.
Thank you very much. I promise to keep it short. As my final question, as you know, the target of these videos are specifically students who are just at the beginning. What they need to do, what path they need to follow if they want to do data science, machine learning, AI, whatever in that line, and be impactful in the world they're living on. How they can help, how can they be part of these waves?
Okay, so I mean that's it's a very interesting question. I mean, I could be speaking for a long time about this, but maybe just first is just based on my experience. So, I mean, I remember like 9 years ago when I opened first position of the work in my team. I remember we had like 20 CVs. Today, in the last research fellow position, we have like 200, and out of these 200 from around the world, 50% were women. So that means
That's
that
very good.
so I'm really, really happy and I'm proud to see that.
Exactly, yeah.
We need more, but that is signal, I think. But then on the other hand, also what we are seeing in the field is that more and more organizations are looking at these profiles. Okay, and even inside the United Nations, now you are having many UN agencies that are looking for like data scientists, for example. I mean, that is something which really, you can go online, UN.org, jobs, you can go to UNICEF, the World Food Program, WHO, many agencies that we are looking for those profiles. Also, big non-profits with impact. But I think that more important than that is, I mean, you are lucky. I mean, you students that are in this space, and we are lucky that this is something that is today has uh, an important role and is kind of changing the world. It's either because, I mean, that's clear. The biggest company, the most powerful companies in the world, they're based on data, they're based on AI. And you can, and the good thing is that you can choose. You can choose where to go or in what to work. So I think, I mean, what I would like is that when you choose where to go, where to choose to go in a place where you can have an impact, it's something you believe in. And I think we have, for me, it's like work for the people and work for the planet. I mean, we have a climate crisis that is coming. I think that's much that we can do there. And we have a lot of sustainable development goals. We have a lot of things that we can do to, I mean, help help ourselves. I mean, do something that we believe in. I mean, yes, working on health and food and many things. So my recommendation is that you can put your expertise at work in any of these domains. Probably you will need to find a way to get exposure, to learn to translate from your technical expertise, your domain, to other domains. I think the world needs more people that are able to speak fluently, let's say, the human rights language and technical language, the medical language and the technical language. So my recommendation is that try to find the way to get your expertise and really work on something that you believe.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a very insightful conversation, and I'm sure there's so many things that my students are going to think about after this, and I hope it opens some new perspective for them. Thank you very much for accepting to do this, and good luck with the very good work that you're doing.
Thank you.